Bama against LSU and a lot of other big action in the SEC, but we're going to look closer at the Tide and the Tigers. And Mike's going to tell you why Garrett Nussmeier may be a first-round pick, but Jalen Milroe with something to say about that. We got a really good matchup coming up Saturday on the Bayou, and we're going to talk about it right after this. All right, you guys know him, the two-time All-American and national champion Mike Johnson, and I'm Mick Gillispie, and it's great to have you here on Cover Crimson, brought to you by mybookie.ag. Use the promo code NEXTROUND to double your initial deposit. We have a great matchup on Saturday. It's a college football playoff game, but we also have a battle of two guys that want to be first-round quarterback picks in the NFL.
Yeah, definitely do. And I think that one of the things that's kind of taken me off guard is how many people in analytics circles or, analysts in college football have kind of fallen in love with Garrett Nussmeier. And, first of all, I think he is a very quality quarterback. I think he probably, the offense they're running suits his style. He's able to throw it downfield. He's able to throw it with precision. Mick, but I got to tell you, one of the reasons that I have started liking Garrett Nussmeier has nothing to do with his play on the field. When you look into Garrett Nussmeier's background, and really this has been an ongoing story. I want to get your thoughts on this. This has been an ongoing story for LSU for the last 2 decades, it seems like, that they cannot sign good quarterbacks out of high school and keep them throughout their career. That's what Garrett Nussmeier is, right? And when you look back at the last over a decade of what LSU has been at quarterback, they've either had guys that have signed with him and left, or they have brought in guys that have started in other programs and have finished at LSU. And obviously, you talk about Jaden Daniels, right? And you go back before that and you talk about Joe Cool, right? Even going back to a Danny Etling, who I think came from Purdue, Zach Mettenberger, who initially signed with Georgia. You go back a long time. It's been a while since LSU's been able to sign a guy out of high school, actually develop that quarterback, and that quarterback stayed there. You had Brandon Harris in there. He started at LSU, but he ended up at UNC. There's some other players, Max Johnson, kind of along the way that have gone different routes as well. So I'm watching Garrett Nussmeier, and I'm thinking of Doug, and I'm thinking of the 2012 Alabama offense. I'm also thinking of the fact that Zach Mettenberger himself, the analyst role at Alabama. So, there's a lot of tie-ins between these two quarterbacks. And I got to tell you, some of the love is necessary for Garrett Nussmeier after watching some more tape. Off-balance throws. He does a good job of keeping his eyes downfield and kind of moving around in the pocket. He's not mobile, but he moves around well in the pocket. So it's a tough task. And I think when you look at what Bama's secondary has been, they've been so hit or miss this year. And I know that Keon Sabb is out. I know we've had Bray Hubbard step into that role, and he's played pretty well. But the more I look at it, man, the more I realize these young corners are going to be up against it when they face LSU this weekend, Mick. And I think it's going to be a good test for these guys in the back end to be able to go up against quarterback like this.
Yeah, right. I've heard that they call Nussmeier kind of a riverboat gambler, but when you're playing quarterback and you don't really have a run game, and that's been an issue without John Emery at getting hurt after like the first game. You got to throw the ball a lot. And when you throw the ball a lot, sometimes bad things happen, but a lot of good things happen too with Kyron Lacey and Aaron Anderson. The tight end makes a bunch of plays.
Mason Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely is. And that's what they're suited to do. And I think that's why they do it, right? I mean, if you're a good coach and you're doing all the right things, you kind of build that offense around like what your personnel can do. And Garrett Nussmeier can let it eat. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels, right? And run the, the speed option and get outside and make people miss and run a 4.4 40. And we're seeing Jaden Daniels do that in the NFL now. And he's doing all the same things, right? In Cliff Kingsbury's offense up in Washington. So it's kind of, it's exciting to look at. I think if you're an LSU fan, but also if you're Alabama, I got to tell you, and this goes back a while, but I think that Kane Womack can, take a lot of things from this. Usually quarterbacks that stand on the spot have not fared very well against Alabama. That's just what it is. Nico Iamaleava was okay against Tennessee, and Tennessee wins, but he even has the ability to kind of break, contain, and get out of there if he needs to. Diego Pavia, obviously, very, very good with his legs and can run that kind of zone option. You go back and look at the pocket quarterbacks that have faced Alabama over the last 2 decades. There hadn't been many of them that have done really, really well. I mean, Trevor Lawrence probably stands out. Deshaun gets a win, that one time. But there have been a lot of quarterbacks that can move around that have beaten Alabama that have really given them fits. But the fact that you have a guy that's standing in the pocket, I think allows your defensive line to kind of tee off. And you and I talked about earlier in the week, the loss of the left guard for LSU's program, who has started, 30 some odd games. That's a big one. And I know that Brian Kelly touched on that earlier this week about, his backup and what that guy's done. But I don't think that LSU can sugarcoat it. And I would be interested to see, if you're Kane Womack, what kind of blitzes you can dial up where you're cross blitzing and, stunting in the inside and really asking that left guard to be able to stay on the same level as the center and the left tackle. But it's going to be a tough task. And I know it's going to be a cool environment, but boy, that is going to be hard with the way those Alabama linebackers played 2 weeks ago. I really feel confident in their ability to blitz up the middle and get some pressure in the face of Garrett Nussmeier.
I feel like Alabama has to do better on third down, both sides of the ball. It's a real big problem. That's something that they're definitely focused on. Kane Womack, their defensive coordinator, kind of talked about that Monday at the press conference. Obviously, LSU is going to have some issues with their, with their offensive linemen out. If you're LSU, how do you work around that?
Well, it's hard. First of all, I think you have to develop some sort of run game. You know me, man. Like, I'm going to tell you to run the football. That's not really what they do. I think, look, their offense right now is 111th in the country at running the ball at 115 yards a game. The good news for them, Mick, is, our defense is 65th in the country right now at 144 yards a game given up. So it's actually a decent matchup for LSU against the Bama defense. You're not used to saying that about being able to run the ball against Bama's defense. But we've given up some lopsided rushing totals throughout the year. So hopefully our guys can step up to the plate. Bama plays a 4-down front a lot of times, but they play like a 2-gap style of 4-down front. Like they're head up to the guards a lot of the times, and that doesn't usually lend itself to great, run defense, although it should when you're playing a 4-down front. So I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see how this matches up, what they try to do offensively. I do think they're going to try to run the ball, if simply for the fact that you can say that we tried and then you build off the play action. And a lot of times that helps backup linemen kind of settle in when you can be a little bit more violent at the point of attack and then kind of settle in, kind of remove your face from the block, get back, get your hands on a guy. That would be the recipe. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with the backup. Mabonga, I think is his name, that'll be playing left guard. So I'll be curious to see what his skill set is. Maybe he's like an all-world pass blocker and just not very good run blocker. If that's the case, then you trust him in these situations. And, of course, they've got two, offensive tackles that are NFL caliber down there in LSU. So those guys will be just fine on the edge. So I expect Bama to almost say, hey, if we can't get there on the edge because their tackles are good, let's try to get up the middle. LSU being able to counter that. I think you just have to move the spot. I think you have to get the eye candy going, some of the pre-snap motion. And maybe you kind of throw in a tunnel screen and some draws and stuff like that to keep those guys off balance as well. Try to hit them when Bama's blitzing up the middle. I think that'll be one of the biggest stories of the game.
Yeah, well, let's see, man. I'm excited about this game. If Alabama can cut back on the penalties, could be a really fun night in Baton Rouge. Guys, talking about fun, check out mybookie.ag. Use the promo code NEXTROUND, double your initial deposit. This line, LSU is favored. Maybe the injury, Mike feels like, pushed the line where Bama's a favorite, 2.5 point, 2 point favorite in Baton Rouge. But you can play that. You got college basketball with Bama and Auburn, both really good. This is going to be an exciting year for the state of Alabama with hoops. But I love this Alabama team. We'll also, you also got NFL, Mike's Falcons in action, first place Falcons, all that at mybookie.ag. And like and subscribe here as you hang out with us on Cover Crimson and on the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. First place Falcons, man.
Look, I'm not going obviously to either one of these games, but it would have been a great week for me, Mick, to head down to South Louisiana to be a part of this. Have you ever done the stay in New Orleans, take the van or bus or whatever you can find over to Baton Rouge for the game. That's a pretty good weekend, buddy. That's a full timer. If anybody's ever able to pull that off, man, that's a good trip.
Yeah, Catfish and his dad got a limousine one time, a Hummer limo, and it picked us up from Harris, took us to the game. You were playing in the game. It was Shula's last game down in Baton Rouge, or maybe you were on the sideline, but we didn't win. And
what was the final score of that game? I don't have any memory of that game. It
wasn't a blowout or anything, but I want to say, and I'll look it up. I want to say it was like 23-16 or something. I'm going to look it up right now.
Yeah, maybe so.
What do you remember?
That would have been what would that have been? A junior Glenn Dorsey,
2006.
Yeah, they were a good team. I do remember them being a good team, but that was after Jamarcus Russell left, right? Or maybe not. Maybe that was his senior year. I don't know, man. There was a couple of those showdowns. I always remember the 2005 one because that was one of the biggest games of my young tenure. I was being redshirted in 2005. I remember College Game Day showing up, and you and I talked about on Tuesday. We were undefeated. I think we were 9-0 at that point, and LSU shows up to town, and we're not able to get it done. I do remember I think we had to start our backup center in that one, and they kept bringing what was called LSU in 2005 kept bringing what we called a Fonzie blitz, where they brought, 2 middle linebackers and the safety all through the A gap, and they called it a Fonzie because it's a gap. And man, when I tell you they hit Brody Croyle up the middle with LaRon Landry, I remember, I still feel that one to this day, teeth shattering in 2005. But I don't have many memories of 2006 game for whatever reason. So I'm sure that it was probably something I don't remember.
Yeah, 28-14 Tigers.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't
rumblings of a new coach coming to town.
Yeah, look, man, that's an unfortunate one right there. I really have no recollection. Like, I usually am really good at remembering some of the games we played in college, even the ones I redshirted through, but that's one right there that I must have crossed off the list. Because I didn't want to know what happened in that one, man. But yeah, you got it, man. We played Auburn a couple weeks later and lost that one, huh? And then Mike Shula was outbound.
What's it like when you're a player and the coach gets fired? Do you guys know like it's coming? Do they have meetings? I mean, how do they tell you?
So I think I've told you the story before, and I'm like, my mind is telling me that this is the timeline, but it doesn't make sense that the timeline in memory in my head does not make sense. All right, but here's what I remember the timeline being. I remember that year, I swear in my brain, we played Auburn the week before Thanksgiving. Right? The week before Thanksgiving. Now my brain now goes, no, we wouldn't have played them the week before Thanksgiving, but in my mind, we played Auburn that year the week before Thanksgiving. You might be able to look it up. I have no idea. All right, but that's what my brain tells me. Then we go a whole week, Mick, where we went home. I went home the following weekend. I got back to the facility on Sunday night the following weekend after the Iron Bowl, and we fired Mike Shula. And I want to say I think we had a meeting with Mike Shula that night. And then I think he was fired the next morning, which is just insane to think about. Like,
right.
It blows my mind that they would have let us have a meeting that night and then fired him the next morning. But I remember finding out from my dad that Mike Shula had been fired. He texted me, and I didn't have class that morning or whatever, and I was sleeping in, and I just saw something about him being let go from my dad. So that was a weird deal, but it did give us one of the more incredible interim runs of all time with Joe Kynes and his inside trap interview when he was,
I love that game,
dude. What a crazy game that was. That was a game. Andre Smith scored a touchdown in that game on the throwback, and that was a crazy one. But yeah, I honestly, of all the games in my tenure, I think I've blacked out on that LSU game from 2006. So I don't have any memory of that one, but my memory must be fuzzy all the way through because my brain tells me that we played Auburn a week before Thanksgiving that year, and that doesn't make any sense either. But I don't know, man. That's just what my brain tells me at this point, and I might be right or wrong on that. But it's been a long time.
That's so funny, though, man, just thinking about those days. Listen to that Coach Kynes interview at the end of the half. He was awesome, though. Was he as cool?
Oh, we got to stop that inside trap.
Was he as awesome in person as he seemed in the interview?
You know what's wild about that entire thing, and I've told this story before, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent because obviously we're talking about Alabama and LSU, but
okay. There
was this moment where we were all aware that the job had been offered to Rich Rodriguez, and we were going through bowl practice. And at that moment, it was like 3 locker rooms ago for Alabama, right? We had flat screen TVs. I think they were flat screen. It might have been rear projection at the time. That would have been 2006. But we had these TVs in the corner locker room, and ESPN was playing, and it was saying on the screen as we were getting like ankles taped and pads on, it's saying Rich Rodriguez has turned down the Alabama job. Like, before we walk out to practice, our entire team is sitting there going, oh, well, that's not good. Because we had been told 24 hours prior, or not been told, by the media we'd been told 24 hours prior that Rich Rodriguez had been offered the Alabama job. And so we were like, oh, well, he said, I'm sitting there looking at it going, Rick Trickett was our O-line coach. They had Steve Slayton and Pat White and all these guys. I'm like, that'd be fun. And then, so I remember Joe Kynes walking into the locker room before bowl practice, and we met in the locker room, which we never did. We never met in the locker room. He walks in, and I think he unplugged the television. He didn't have a remote for us. I think he unplugged the TV, and he said, told us to hit a knee, and he turned around and he goes, that guy just made the worst mistake of his life.
Okay,
not coming here. He said that right there in the middle of that locker room. I will never forget that moment, because I was looking at the TV. I didn't know Rich Rodriguez, but I felt like I felt like our program was just blowing in the wind at that point. And I was like, man, it's like one of those things where you ask a girl out and she says no. You probably get the guts to ask a girl out and she says no. That's what it felt like. But Joe Kynes, I'll never forget that. He said, that guy just made the worst mistake of his life, man. Not coming here and coaching you young men, that's going to come back to bite him. And I got to tell you, it probably did, and not that he would have been not that he would have done what Nick did at Alabama, but I think it would probably ended better for him. And now he's upstate at Jacksonville State after having a couple runs elsewhere, man. So, it's just one of those things that was a crazy moment in time, because then you had all this silence for like another month. And then, word's kind of out there that you're waiting on Nick. And the whole time I'm thinking, okay, we can wait all we want to, but I don't think that means he's coming here. And then, obviously that all kind of comes down later. So that was a wild time to be a part of that program. And I'll never forget that meeting from Joe Kynes in the middle of that locker room of him saying, guy just made the worst mistake of his life after he just turned off the TV where Rich Rodriguez had reportedly turned it down. That was nuts,
man. He had perspective, because Rich Rodriguez made the worst mistake of his career. He would have came to Alabama. Every single coach, no matter who it is, has won 10 games in a season. You have recruiting classes. I ran into Frank Beamer at an event in Virginia one time, and it was right after he reportedly turned down Alabama. And I grew up a Maryland fan, and they were in the same conference, or maybe,
right,
but they played or something. I said, Maryland just had the best recruiting class in school, maybe in school history. It was like 12, and I'm like, and Alabama had the worst recruiting class that they've had in a long time, and it was like 10, and that's what I said to him. Like, basically, like, you could have gone to Alabama and you would have killed it. He had no idea what he turned down by not going to Alabama.
Yeah, and it's wild to think about, man, because to your point, I'm cannot tell you how thankful I am that he did turn that job down. I mean, like you can imagine, I don't think that he ever would have got to that level that Nick did. Nobody ever has in the history of college football. So I look at it and all the things that I took away from Nick Saban and everything else, and I think, thank God he turned that job down. But in that moment, it's like, man, you just feel like that kid that nobody wants. You want to be wanted by one of these guys. And a lot of questions, I think, around the locker room at that time. Transferring was a lot more difficult, but a lot of people are like, dude, are we like, what's going to happen here? And of course, the great Mal Moore did a good job of meeting with us, kind of trying to keep us up to date and keep our hopes afloat. And we had, I can't tell you how much respect for Joe Kynes in that moment as well. So it was interesting to say the least, man. No doubt about it.
So LSU won a national championship with 2 losses or 3 losses. Wasn't it like
2?
Okay, 2 losses. So
Yeah.
whoever loses this game is going to have 3 losses. So it feels like this is a play-in game, or at least a stay alive game. Do you agree with that, or could you possibly make it with 3 losses?
Well, I think that this is probably an elimination game for Bama. I don't necessarily think it's an elimination game for LSU, and let me explain why. I think that LSU, if they were to lose this game, right, there's still that non-conference loss that they suffered. Bama, if they were to lose, having 3 inside of the SEC keeps them out of any shot, obviously, at the SEC title. But there's so many teams, Mick, that kind of sit in this spot, right? 2 losses. Ole Miss is one of those teams. Missouri is one of those teams. Tennessee, with the 1 loss sitting in front of them. A&M with the 1 loss sitting in front of them. All these teams, Texas with the 1 loss in front of them, all these teams are kind of jockeying for a spot, right? And this is where it comes back to me, and you talked about this 2 weeks ago. It almost feels like, in a way, you might be getting penalized if you were to be a 2-loss team and go into the SEC title game, and the SEC title game becomes your 3rd loss, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said about that. Like if you were, if you were Texas or whatever, or Texas A&M, I'm sorry, they're still left to play this year, and they were to jockey for a spot and play Georgia in the SEC title game and were to lose, I still think both those programs have a path. But if either one of them were to get 1 more loss between now and then, or Georgia were to get a loss, then I think you're dealing with a situation where it would be impossible for a 3-loss team to get in the SEC. So it's tough because I don't necessarily, when you do the math, think this is an elimination game. But when you look at all these other SEC teams that are right there, that 1 loss could possibly get a second, a team like A&M, a team like Texas, and then you kind of move on from there. Boy, it's hard. It's hard to think of kind of the way that Bama would be able to work its way back in, LSU being the same way, Ole Miss being the same way. It's hard to think that there would be any kind of path for them just simply because of numbers, because you're going to have teams in this conference in front of you, that'll be playing other games throughout the rest of the season. Remember, Georgia's SEC run is done next week. They'll play Ole Miss, then they'll play Tennessee, and they're done with SEC play. Right, they'll play Georgia Tech at the end of the year and somebody else before then, but they're done after next week. So it's intriguing to look at, and I'll get your thoughts on it too. But I told you this Tuesday, man. This is the most pivotal game of Jalen Milroe's career as a quarterback at Alabama. There is no doubt about it. I think when you looked at last year and you looked at him building something and being under Nick Saban through this run and really playing well down the stretch and became a Heisman candidate all the way until things fell apart against Michigan. And now you look at the ups and downs. The first half against Georgia, we're talking about him being the number 1 overall pick, right? And then you have a Vanderbilt game in which Bama lost, and he still plays well. But then you come out and get a couple of boneheaded plays against South Carolina, some really bad quarterback play against Tennessee, and some ups and downs against Missouri through the air. And you wonder what the near future is of Alabama's program with Jalen Milroe at quarterback. Does he fit the system? Is he able to get done some of the things that Kalen DeBoer wants the quarterback to get done inside the scheme? You add in the fact that, like you and I just talked about, a 3-loss Alabama team probably not making it into the playoff, and you're going to play LSU at night in Death Valley with a guy who might be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft at quarterback for them. You're going to be put on the biggest stage maybe you've been put on since last year if you're Jalen Milroe, and you're going to have every opportunity to show the NFL world and the Alabama world that you are the quarterback, that you are that guy, that you can get things done, and everything is still out in front of him if he can go win this game Saturday night. On the flip side, if you're Jalen Milroe and the hiccups continue and you're not able to make some of the simple throws you've been asked to make in this offense, and then all of a sudden your NFL future becomes in question, at least being a first-round, second-round pick, and Alabama has no path to the playoff, things become bleak in a hurry. Now you're finishing out the year against a bad Oklahoma team, a bad Auburn team, and you're wondering what bowl game you're going to find your way into. So Jalen Milroe, he's played in some big games. Obviously, the Georgia game last year, massive. The playoff game, massive. I'm not saying they're to that level, but just in terms of his legacy and the immediate outlook for what Jalen Milroe is as a quarterback at Alabama and in the future, he's got a massive, massive Saturday night sitting on his shoulders, and hopefully he can go get it done.
Yeah, man, I think you said it well, man. I agree with that. And I'm wondering, like, what that looks like. Is he ready to take the next step? Is he ready to rebound? Or is it going to go this direction? And I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on him, but he's got the natural talent and ability. He's got the experience to have a great game, and it would be nice to just get something going early, get some confidence in the game early and be able to build off of that. I think that would definitely make it to where right out of the chute, you feel comfortable and you get going. If he starts slow and they're jumping off sides and it's one of those games, it could be a really bad night.
Well, and let me ask you this, because this is a question I've wrestled with, because I think we had a vision of what we thought Jalen Milroe is. And I got to tell you, when you start looking at the numbers, is Jalen Milroe an elite runner? I think we all look at Jalen Milroe and say, man, he's the best athlete on the team. He's probably the best. Kirby Smart said, hey, he's one of the best running backs in the country. He just happens to play quarterback. I'm just not sure that that's true. And that's not really a knock on Jalen, because honestly, inside of this offense, his biggest threat right now is with his arm. But you start looking at some of his recent numbers. Now, a lot of that has to do, with my opinion, with the struggles of the O-line here recently. I was a big fan of this O-line to start the year. They have not lived up to the hype here recently. So I think that's concerning. But I'm just not sure, when you look at Jalen Milroe in the open field, that I'm ready to call him an elite runner right now. And so I think that maybe he can answer some questions in that realm as well.
Yep. And that's what it's going to come down to. His ability to run the ball, I think, sets up his pass game. And if he's able to run the ball effectively, it makes Alabama twice as tough. But, but Alabama running the ball with the running backs, the RPOs matter, the passing matters, but it all comes down to discipline to me, just being able to stop jumping off sides and making dumb mistakes. So that's what it's going to come down to on Saturday. Let's talk about some of the other games going on, and then I'll get your thought of Alabama and LSU last. But 11 a.m. this Saturday, Florida's just incredibly tough schedule continues. This time they're at Texas. They're a 21.5-point underdog. The over-under is 47.5. Texas 7-1, 3-1 in the SEC. Florida 4-4, 2-3 in the SEC. But they've gotten a couple of, those losses where you get over, where you go to Tennessee and you fight hard and you lose. You lose your quarterback. Then you play in the cocktail party and you look pretty good, and then your quarterback goes down and you lose. So they're on the third string quarterback, and they're playing at Texas.
Yeah. That's not and earlier today, Billy Napier gets the vote of confidence from the AD over there, saying that he's going to be the coach. And I think that probably puts this team at ease a little bit. But I think one of the things they point to when they talk about Billy Napier is the fact that his team is playing hard. This is a team that you thought, with all the injuries they've had, it's not just quarterback, man. They've had injuries all over the field. Best player, like every position group, has gone down for Florida. And so I think when you point to that and you go, man, he's really kind of kept this thing afloat, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. And you mentioned the injury to the quarterback last week. I got to tell you, like, this has Paul Pierce vibes, where this kid has come out this week and they say that he's, questionable to play against Texas. I'm like, they just carted him off a week ago. How is he going to come back and be questionable against Texas? I mean, it's unbelievable to think about. But I just don't know that Florida's got the firepower to get this done. But I will say, man, 21.5 is a massive line. I think if they can get any kind of good quarterback play or any kind of offense, they can keep that one tight, because their defense plays hard. And I think on the back end that Texas has to be able to capitalize with their wide receivers. But Florida's going to play hard. Can they get a couple of turnovers and things like that, and at least hold serve on offense? That'll tell you the tail of the tape in that one.
All right, that's the first game we're going to look at in the SEC. Then at 2:30, the big game. I wish they would have put this one at night and put Bama and LSU at 2:30 selfishly, but at Vaught Hemingway Stadium. Number 16, Ole Miss, 7-2, 3-2 in the conference. Built to win this game against number 3, Georgia, 7-1, 5-1 in the SEC. Georgia is just a 2.5-point favorite, and the over-under is 54.5.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy is I just talked about Jalen Milroe and some of the ups and downs of his career, right? How he's been here and then he's been here. And now we kind of have this question of what his legacy is. This is one of those games for Carson Beck, too. There's a lot of Georgia fans. I live in Georgia, dude. There's a lot of Georgia fans that want to know what the heck is going on between Carson Beck, Mike Bobo, Kirby Smart, and everything else with this offense. And I don't know if you've noticed, and my apologies to Ole Miss. I did not understand how good their front seven was. I mean, I knew that they had talent, but you kind of look at that sometimes. It's not the first time that Ole Miss has had talent in their front seven. I mean, they always, Nkandichi and some of the guys that they've had over the years, they are really good in the front seven, because I think a lot of people look at it and go, well, Georgia needs to get the run game going. Tate Ratledge is back at right guard. They need to get ETN more involved and go back to Georgia football. This ain't the week to do it, buddy. Let me just tell you, this is not the week to do it. Ole Miss playing at an extremely high level. Not only that, but I think there's some worry amongst Georgia fans about a mobile quarterback in Jackson Dart, that it can carry this offense at times, right? And you add that in with Lane Kiffin going to give you your best shot. And you look at some of the things Jalen Milroe has done to that program and that defense over the last couple of years, and you look at Jackson Dart and some of the play designs he's going to have for himself. This is a tough game. This is going to be a very tough game for Georgia. I think Georgia's obviously going to be given the nod by a lot of people because they're Georgia. They play really, really hard. They play a good brand of defense. We already saw them go on the road at Texas and win a big game at night. But I'm almost to the point, Mick, where I'm leaning Ole Miss in this game. I think that they do such a good job, in that front seven, that I think that Carson Beck is going to be up against it, and he probably throws a couple nice balls over that Ole Miss defense, if I'm not mistaken.
See, I don't think so. This is where Ole Miss gets eliminated.
Not so fast, my friend.
Yeah, sorry, Lane Kiffin, you are not going to win this game. You've never won any of these games. Went out, spent all that money, and this will be the game that eliminates Ole Miss. Georgia just lives up for these games, and I know they've put all the interceptions. They haven't been great on the road, but they'll figure out a way. But I'm looking forward to watching it.
Same.
Not saying I'm pulling for Georgia. That's what I think is going to happen. All right, this is another really interesting game here. 3:15. Who would have thought that South Carolina at Vanderbilt would be so intriguing? South Carolina, of course, is favorite because Vanderbilt has the brand that no one believes in. 4.5 points. South Carolina is favorite. That means Vandy's a home dog. 6-3, 3-2 Vanderbilt. All they've done is beat Alabama, beat Auburn on the road. They almost beat Missouri when they were undefeated. Should have beat them and didn't. Lost by 3 to Texas at home. South Carolina's Jekyll and Hyde. They took care of Texas A&M last week, which means this week they're going to be horrible. 5-3 record, 3-3 in the conference.
Mick, I cover the Falcons, right, and work Falcons pre and post. And the Falcons in week 1 lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Pittsburgh kicked 6 field goals to win that game. The Falcons' game plan was as bad as I've ever seen a game plan be in week 1. I mean, it was awful. You had nothing going on, right? And I look at the Falcons. The Falcons are pretty good right now. But I think, man, what would they have done if they could have how good would that record have looked if they could have just beat Pittsburgh in week 1? That's how I look at Vanderbilt in the Georgia State game. I'm like, how could y'all have not just taken care of business against Georgia State? And we'd be talking about a 7-2 Vanderbilt team right now. That's what we'd be talking about, a 7-2 Vanderbilt team facing off with a beatable South Carolina team. Like, we would be having those conversations about Vandy being one of the 2 lost teams, because I told you before the game and I told you after, they're a good football team, man. They do it the right way. They play gritty. They do things nicely on offense. Remember, Vanderbilt lost to Texas. There's a couple of plays that could have gone either way in the fourth quarter of that one that Vanderbilt could have jumped up and gotten. So it's crazy to look at. South Carolina, on the other hand, they're coming off a big victory over Texas A&M. Nobody saw that one coming. South Carolina starting to play like a more quality team, and they're starting to play like the version we saw against Alabama, to be honest with you. They're playing like a team that doesn't beat themselves a ton and allows that quarterback to kind of go to work. Remember, they should have probably beat LSU earlier in the year. They didn't. The quarterback gets hurt in that one. So this one's an interesting one, man. And I know, like you said, Vanderbilt's going to get no respect. It's one of those weird time slots, that 4:15. I like Vanderbilt in this game. I don't know what it is, man. After seeing them before Bama played them and seeing them celebrate, I'm not happy Bama lost that game at all. But I just think that Vanderbilt goes about things the right way for the most part under Clark Lee. I love how gritty they are, and I think Vanderbilt gets this done.
We're the only ones in the world that said Vanderbilt had a chance to beat Alabama.
And honestly, I laughed at myself saying it, Mick. I'm like, man, we're just, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it was too obvious to me that they do things that are going to give you issues up front for Alabama, and boy, did they ever.
Yeah, well, we didn't want it to happen, but
no.
Here's one we don't have to talk about. Awful Mississippi State at number 7 Tennessee. It's a 24-point spread, 61.5 over under. Mississippi State 0-5 in the conference. Tennessee 4-1. I can't imagine that being worth talking about. Oklahoma's at Missouri. This is an old Big 12 matchup. Oklahoma 5-4, 1-4 in the SEC. Missouri 6-2, 2-2 in the SEC. I just feel like Oklahoma is going to be looking for a new coach here soon. Oklahoma is a 3-point favorite, even though they're at Missouri. 45.5 over under.
That line stinks, man. That line stinks to high heavens. That line stinks.
Missouri win just because it'd be great for Bama's schedule. Although I guess they play Oklahoma next.
I was going to say they're going to get Oklahoma's best shot here in a couple of weeks. No, I'm with you, man. I don't know the Venables thing at Oklahoma. I think they're going to have to finish strong if he's going to keep his job. You know what's funny? I'm glad you mentioned the old Big 12 matchup. Don't you just see Sam Bradford and Chase Daniel facing off in this game? Like, that's just all. I'm like, man, Sean Weatherspoon on defense for Missouri against some of the players that Oklahoma's had over the years, man. That was always such a fun matchup back, what was that, 20, almost 20 years ago. Yeah, I mean, look, there's just so many questions around Oklahoma. If I had not looked at the line, I would have told you Missouri was going to run away with this. But you look at everything that they've been dealing with at Missouri, injury-wise and from the ground up, that line leads me to believe that they really think that Oklahoma is the better football team here. So I guess that's the way I'd go. But you mentioned it. Not a lot to talk about, but we'll see this Oklahoma team in a couple of weeks.
I already saw Missouri. They didn't score any points, but they're much better at home than they are on the road this year. And then the last game is our game. Alabama at LSU, 6-2, both teams. Bama 3-2 in the conference, LSU 3-1 in the conference. Can you imagine Bama being 3-3 in the SEC after going undefeated in the conference last year? And they haven't lost 3 conference games in a long time. Bama's a 2.5-point favorite, and it's a 58.5 over under. Garrett Nussmeier for LSU against Jalen Milroe for the Crimson Tide. Night game, Death Valley, Baton Rouge. But you know what? Alabama's always gone there and played well. They've never intimidated us with the night at Death Valley thing. I hope that doesn't change.
Yeah, and look, you say we've always gone there and played well. I know over the course of history, Alabama absolutely has, but you and I have both been in the crowd for some of the crazier finishes to football games that you will ever see. And I mean, the TJ Yeldon, comeback game. I was there for the Blake Sims drive. I think that game either went to overtime or was right at the end. That was a crazy one. I played in the 2008 game that went to overtime and won on a John Parker Wilson quarterback sneak when we were the number 1 team in the country. So Bama has had success, but by no means most of the time has it been runaway success, especially not at night. So
close game wins.
Yeah, I mean, close game wins, gritty, hard fought, NFL players all over the place. It's always that fun matchup, right, in the old SEC West. I can't believe I'm even saying old SEC West. Heavyweight fight, man. And what's crazy is this is a game that was very famous. What has it been now? 13 years, 12, 13 years since the 9-6 or whatever that, eventually went to the national championship.
Yeah.
I'm expecting the complete opposite on Saturday night. I'm expecting 2 quarterbacks to come out and throw the ball like their hair's on fire and, being able to get the ball up and down the field. And I just think it comes down to this. Can Jalen Milroe make the simple intermediate throws, the throws to the sideline, the throws on the crossing routes? And can Garrett Nussmeier keep away from making throws that turn the ball over to Alabama? Like, which quarterback can accomplish that? Jalen Milroe, when you go back and look at Tennessee, we're talking about, 10-yard outs that he's overthrowing. We're talking about some simple quarterback throws that he's not making. Garrett Nussmeier is the opposite. Garrett Nussmeier is going to make those throws, But the ones down the middle that Jalen Milroe is so good at, the deep balls and some of the seams, that's the one Garrett Nussmeier tipped ball pick going back the other way and things like that. So can Malachi Moore jump up and get one? Can Bray Hubbard jump up and get one? One of these young corners jump up and get a ball. I think that's going to tell the tale of the tape. I think this game is really close in the fourth quarter. There's been a lot of talk, and you and I have done it as well, about Jalen Milroe's legs and what they are. If somehow they can get Jalen Milroe going vertically the way they did last year, it was his best rushing game of his career, 4 rushing touchdowns in a game against the Heisman Trophy winner last year, right? I think that Jalen Milroe looks over at Jaden Daniels and goes, man, I can do all those things. Steps up, scores 4 tutties last year. If he can kind of replicate that performance, right, where all of a sudden you're going north and south with your legs and not running towards the sideline on every run and play, I think that Bama pulls away with this game in the end. But, boy, ton of points. I think both teams go over 30 in this one. And you're looking at a game where maybe Jalen Milroe can make a play at the end the way so many Alabama quarterbacks have before him down in Baton Rouge. And it's going to be a classic to me.
All right. We'll be watching it. And right after the game, we'll be here. Well, at least I will, taking your calls and talking about the contest and post-game reaction and all that right here on covercrimson.com. You and I used to do that together, but we never got any calls. I get calls.
Well, I do want to ask you, man. Look, I took the weekend off from Falcons coverage, and I'm going to be headed over to Alabama, and I don't want to say where I'm going because it is for a surprise for one of my good buddies, surprise birthday party. But I don't want to say where I'm going, but I'll be in the state of Alabama nonetheless for this one. Now, Alabama football won't be there, but if you hear somebody in the north end of the state screaming on Saturday night, it might be me because I am not going to be in Atlanta this weekend, and I'm stoked to go back to the great state of Alabama this weekend.
You should call in. You should jump on with us for old times.
Listen, due to my plans on Saturday, you might not want to have me talking into any sort of microphone, even on a cell phone.
We love that here. I'm going. The tailgate shows at Floribama on Friday, and you know what happened there. And you know what? Now we just stay on the air. You know what?
Yeah, I just let it ride. Let it ride.
If you slur, it's fine.
That's fine. My favorite casino game, Mick, is called Let It Ride. Just let it ride. Just let it go.
Guys, thanks for hanging out with us on Cover Crimson. Check out covercrimson.com. Message board over there. Clint Lamb breaking down every game, every play, all of that stuff. A lot of good information at covercrimson.com. MyBookie.ag. We're presented by MyBookie.ag. Promo code next round to double your initial deposit. As you hang out with us on our channel, like and subscribe, thumbs up, and hit the bell. I know that's a lot to ask for, and Auburn fans get really confused, but you guys, I know you, and you can do all of those things in one sitting. Roll Tide, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will talk to you guys again.